Hello and welcome everyone to this CBT Nuggets webinar. My name's Anthony, and don't worry, you're in the right place. This is the Leveraging VMware Horizon webinar with Keith Barker. Before I hand things over to Keith, I just want to remind everyone that the chat pod is available to you to ask any questions you have. And time allowing, Keith will do his best to answer some of those questions at the end of the webinar. I'd also like to remind you guys that there's going to be a recording posted on our blog, CBT Nuggets blog, which is at blog.cbtnuggets.com. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and hand things over to Keith.
Hey, thank you, Anthony. I am just super excited to be here. I always have a little bit of a nervous twinge right before we go live, but then as I start chatting with everybody in class and getting to realize that we're all human, right? We're all from the same species, I get a lot more comfortable, and I'm very honored to spend a few minutes with you this morning or this afternoon or this evening, depending on where you're coming from in the world, to talk about Horizon View. Now, one of the challenges that I've discovered when working with pretty much any technology, whether it's learning to play the piano or learning a new sport and learning the terms or learning a new technology, is that there's a lot of vocabulary that, it seems like people just throw it around. And sometimes somebody who's new to a technology or not as familiar with it, they might get stuck on a word or a term, and then just they're not obsessed with it, but they can't get past that term, and so they're not catching the whole rhythm of the effort of the technology in place. So what I wanted to do was introduce a few words, a few terms to you, and if you, like me, have worked with vSphere before or Horizon View or heard of it, some of these concepts are going to be familiar and yet others may be new. So vSphere is the general name for a VMware virtualized environment. And vSphere involves things like ESXi hosts and vCenter servers to manage those ESXi hosts, where we can create virtual machines in a corporate environment. Where would we find vSphere and the vCenter that manages it? Very likely in a corporate environment. For example, if I went over to Anthony's house and we're having dinner and having a great time, it's not likely that he would say, hey, come take a look at my vSphere environment, unless, of course, he was a CBT Nuggets student and was building a lab, mocking it all up. So vSphere is normally the corporate side of the implementation of VMware's products, and in a home environment, we're more likely to see VMware Workstation as a single computer application that creates a virtualized environment. The other terms here, let me get my marking pen here. Let me bring that up real quick. And I'm feeling like, let's go ahead and use blue. That'll work. The connection server, you're not going to believe this, but in a Horizon View environment, the connection server is like the broker that connects clients to virtual machines. So if you and I were connecting and wanting to connect to a virtual machine, we would connect to the connection broker, this connection server, to see what resources are available to us. In some environments, we may not want to have a connection server directly exposed to a hostile network. You may think, well, what's a hostile network? And that's pretty much any network. And the worse and the less control you have of that network, the more hostile it is. So the internet, for example, would be a fantastic idea or an example of a hostile network. So we want to maybe have a security server attached to the internet, and then our users can connect to that. And for the rest of these, let's do this. I've been told that a picture is worth 1,000 words. So you know what? A picture of all these components as we describe and build our vocabulary is probably worth at least 999 words. So let's take a look at this topology, and we'll go through some of those concepts and build that vocabulary together. And let me bring out my pen tool once again, and I'm going to go ahead and use, I think, red once again. Okay, so we talked about a vCenter server, and what vCenter does for a living is vCenter coordinates all the efforts in a vSphere environment, and the vSphere environment is right here. Now, the vSphere environment involves some hardware. So we have some ESXi servers. And an ESXi server is a hypervisor that's running on a server, a physical server or a logical server in a vSphere environment. So vCenter is the brains, if you will, and the ESXi hosts are the actual worker bees that are housing these virtualized machines, these VMs inside of the vSphere environment. Next term, I'd like to, let me bring this up on the screen just for a moment. Thank you for that. The connection server is right here in our Horizon View environment. And the connection server has the ability to connect users to a virtual machine. So Bob, the user out here, says, I want to go ahead and connect to some type of a virtual machine. He connects instead to the connection server, and the connection server allows him to go ahead and see the resources he's entitled to use. In fact, as far as computers go, I'd like to maybe change the focus just for a moment and talk with you about Windows. Now, everybody within the sound of my voice has either seen or worked with or uses or is familiar with Windows. And one of the problems when working with Windows, let's say we have 100 users, is that if we have 100 users and each of those users has their own PC and their own version of Windows and their own applications, the problem is doing updates and installs on all those computers. Every time you do a patch or an update, you got to visit every single physical machine, and it's a major bummer. So one of the solutions to that is this type of an environment. So if we have all of these virtual machines and we keep them here in the data center, then the backup, the management, the patching of those virtual machines becomes a lot easier because they're now consolidated inside of the data center running inside of vSphere in the VMware environment. Now the other challenge is this. If we do need 100 virtual machines, and we want to run Windows 8.1 Professional as an example, we need to install Windows 8.1 100 times. And I don't know about you, but if you've installed Windows 8.1 recently, it takes somewhere between 10 and 30 minutes on a good day to install it and get it configured. So if we have 100 computers, we're installing 100 versions of Windows, that could take a whole bunch of time. So one of the solutions to that, to solve that, is to go ahead and use something called a clone and or a template. And here's how a clone or a template operates. We take some time and we create the perfect machine, the perfect virtual machine. So I'd like you to think about in your environment, at your home, at your company, what the perfect computer would look like, the perfect operating system. So Windows 8.1, if you're installing that, what apps do you want? Do you want Microsoft Word, Excel, PowerPoint? Do you want to customize the tiles? Do you want to customize your browser? Do you want to install Chrome and not use the default Internet Explorer? The perfect machine, and then what we can do as a virtualized perfect machine, we can clone it. And we can use the process of a template, and we can stamp out or reproduce that perfect machine 100 times. So instead of installing Windows 100 times, we could install it one time, do it correctly, and then clone that perfect machine and customize it using what's called a customization specification inside of vSphere, and then roll that out over and over again. So about this point, I often get the question, what about licensing, Keith? I mean, if I have one copy of Windows, I can't use it 100 times. And the answer is, right, not legally. You want to license all those, but assuming that the licensing is in place, the actual creation of these virtual machines is a lot faster if we're using clones and templates. Now, the other piece of that is too, is if we have 100 virtual machines that we need, does that mean the administrator has to click the button 100 times to create those 100 machines? And the answer is yes, but here's where we can start adding in some of the really cool Horizon View pieces. We can set up something called an automated pool, and we would configure that here inside of, it's actually done on the connection server with something called View Administrator, but we can create an automated pool. Now, when I say the word automated, what does that conjure up? And you might be thinking, well, automated means it happens automatically, yeah, by itself. So what we could do with an automated pool is we could say, we need to create some virtual machines, and we want this automatic tool to do it for us. So don't do it all at once. We just want to have, for example, maybe 4 virtual machines up and available and ready to be assigned to a user at any given time. So the first couple of people connect, the Horizon View automatically assigns Bob his virtual machine, and then the automatic tool says, oh, we only have 3 virtual machines. Let's go ahead and start cranking some additional virtual machines up. So in the background, it can automatically create, and as users log in, automatically provision those virtual machines for the users, so we don't have to touch it. Now, the next challenge, and this is a real one, is another real one, I should say, is that Windows takes quite a bit of disk space. So if we have Windows 8.1, and let's use a disk size of, let's say, I don't know, we'll be conservative, 20 gigabytes for a hard disk. So if we have 100 virtual machines, 20 gigs each, that's quite a bit of storage. And that all has to be available inside of our vSphere environment. So the solution to not having to allocate 20 gigs for each and every single virtual machine is something called a linked clone. And let me just check linked and make sure that came up. It looks like linked. Yeah, it looks like mostly linked. Yeah, that little bit of there. There we go. A linked clone. And the way a linked clone works is, instead of, think about it. If we have 100 computers running Windows, how much of the core disk, the hard drive that has the Windows operating system, how much of that is the same across our entire environment? And it's very likely if we roll out 100 brand new machines, that probably 95% or more of the base configuration and the disk storage for those virtual machines is identical. So with a linked clone, what we can do in Horizon View is we can simply create like a master image. You can call it a golden image. In VMware Horizon View, they call this a replica. We generate it from something called a template. Let me fix that T there. And wow, my S isn't very good either. And E. So we can create this replica from the perfect machine, and using Horizon View and something called the Composer server, we can go ahead and simply have our 100 virtual machines share that common element on the hard drive. So instead of having 100 machines with a 20 gigabyte hard drive each, we can have 100 machines that are all sharing the 20 gigs, and then we can, in the background, make little delta disks for each of our virtual machines, so that anything that Bob changes or any changes are made to the operating system disk, it still can be a difference, a change, but still 95% of the core operating system is on that shared disk. So now 100 users may take, for example, a boatload less of storage if they're all sharing a common base image. And that's possible with Horizon View. So there's one little problem that we haven't addressed yet, and we're going to do it right now, and that problem is the user. And I'm not saying that users are a problem, but the reality is that a user, let me bring a pen out again, if a user is out here, so here's Bob, and he's sitting at, maybe he's sitting at a tablet, or maybe he's sitting at a basic PC that has a Linux box, for example, or a Windows machine. And the problem is Bob's out here in cyberspace or on the internet, and Bob's virtual machine is over here in the data center. How do we solve that? And the way that we solve that in a Horizon View virtual desktop infrastructure solution, and that's what the acronym of VDI is, it's where the virtual desktop, the VM, is here in the data center, and the user connects to it, is we use a client. And you'll probably never guess what they call the Horizon View client. I'll give you a second to think about that. What do you think VMware named the Horizon View client that can run on the computer's physical device they're sitting at? And if you're saying, Keith, I know, it's the Horizon View client, you would be absolutely right. 2 thumbs way up. So we install a client, for example, that that PC that your parents have for 2 or 3 years, and it's so old it has like maybe the original Pentium processor, or not a 46, that's way too old, but a Pentium, very little memory. You can go ahead and install the client on this device, as long as it has network connectivity, and with the Horizon client can then connect up to the connection server, and then you can see what Bob is entitled to use. And once Bob is selected, for example, his virtual machine, he's allowed to go ahead and connect, and let me use a different color here. she's blue, then Bob is able to connect to his virtual machine, and the technology that we use there, or the protocol, is licensed by Teradici, and VMware is the biggest customer of that, and it's called PC over IP. And it's basically, it's called a display protocol. So imagine Bob sitting at this computer, and whenever Bob types a character, that typing is actually forwarded over PC over IP to his virtual machine in the data center, and the virtual machine is processing that. When the screen in the data center refreshes or changes, that information is reflected back on Bob's computer screen. So it's as if, I'll tell you, if we boil it all down, it's like remote control. The Horizon View client is taking remote control of the virtual machine, and so Bob can sit out here in cyberspace, but he can have all his applications and his operating system and everything else managed and secured and provisioned here in vSphere, in the vSphere environment, which is managed by vCenter. The other thing I wanted to point out was there is some magic that goes on the back end too. On this virtual machine, which we can spin up all day and all night inside of the vSphere, this virtual machine is also going to have a Horizon View component installed. And here it's called the agent. So we install the Horizon View agent on this virtual machine. And that's the magic that allows the Horizon View client working in conjunction with the Horizon View connection server to allow connectivity to that resource. Now another challenge is this. I get it. I totally get it that VMware is not the only vendor out there doing virtualized desktop infrastructure. There are other companies, and like Microsoft, for example, and Citrix, they have their solutions as well. And in an environment where we have some terminal services. Now, terminal services is the old name for what now Microsoft calls remote desktop services, or RDS. And in RDS, if you want to, you can have remote desktops that are served up to clients, or you can have applications that are served up to clients individually, and like, for example, an application they can run through the VDI infrastructure. And people don't want to throw out their Microsoft resources just because they're using Horizon View as a convenient way to manage and work with VDI. So in addition to supporting the agents and the virtual machines that are running inside of vSphere on the VMs, we also have the ability to link in with Horizon View into RDS resources. So Bob here would have the ability to connect to the connection server, and there might be pools, and those pools could refer to virtual machines that are running in vSphere. They could be referring to applications that are running in RDS, remote desktop services. They could be referring to desktops that are being delivered from a Microsoft server with RDS. So we have the integration there as well. So you don't have to say, well, we can't use those services anymore, but you can integrate it. Now, another big player, of course, in the virtualization world, at least for VDI, is Citrix. I love Citrix. They're fantastic. And with Citrix, they have solutions like XenApp and XenDesktop. And there's also hooks inside of VMware Horizon View, as well as VMware Horizon Mirage and Workspace, to go ahead and integrate with some of those other vendors' products, like XenApp and XenDesktop. The other piece I wanted to point out here was this Composer piece. Horizon View Composer is the magic behind the orchestration of the linked clones. And so the play-by-play would be this. If we configure in Horizon View that we want to use linked clones, which saves us tons of disk space, and also with linked clones, if you want to do an update, you can go ahead and simply do a recompose feature, and you can actually push updates out to the base image, and all the machines will be updated, like in minutes, compared to hours and hours if you're doing it individually. But when we say we want an automatic tool, and we say we want to use linked clones, what's happening is the instructions for that are actually going over to VMware View Composer, who's working in conjunction with vCenter to actually create these linked clones. So for a full solution with VMware Horizon View, we have a connection server, we have the Composer, and then we have an existing vSphere infrastructure that we would tie that into. In this case here, the security server is just for the benefit of not putting your connection server directly connected to the internet, a hostile network, because it's not a matter of if we're going to get attacked or compromised or attempted to be compromised, it's a matter of when. So we want to have, in this topology, we have a firewall, then we have our security server, so Bob can have a secure connection from the internet all the way to the security server, and then a further connection into the connection server, and then access into his virtual desktops or remote desktops or apps, or the Zen app and Zen desktop resources that are available to him that he's been entitled to go ahead and use. So that's a lot of drawing. Let me clear that up for a second. And I had a lot of fun with a lot of vocabulary. And let me just do a quick check here. We've touched on all of these. The VDI is an acronym for Virtual Desktop Infrastructure. It's just a fancy way of saying there's a VM running in the data center. Our user is going to connect to it. That user could be a local user at the company, or that user could be remote coming in off the internet or some other network. And the client's going to be using Horizon View Client, and the VM in the data center is going to be running the Horizon View agent for that connection. And they're going to use primarily PC over IP for that. There's also options for other protocols, including RDP as well. So here's what I'd like to do. I see that we have a couple of questions in the queue, and we have about 7 minutes left. So what I would love to do is let me go ahead and take some of the questions that are in the queue. If you do have a question right now, please chat it in. And if I can get to it in the 6 or 7 minutes we have right now, I'd be happy to do it. Also, as you're typing those comments and questions in, if you want to reach me, I do Twitter, and I have a drop cam in my office where I record. And if you ever want to see what it looks like for me to create a nugget, and it's quite a process because I end up with like maybe an 8 to 15 minute nugget, but there's usually like 2 or 3 hours that go into it of recording and retakes and edits and so forth. If you're ever interested in that, when I do turn on my drop cam in my office, I also tweet it. So I'll tweet, I'll say, hey, I'm recording this right now. I'll put a timestamp on it, and I'll have a link. And that's when my drop cam is on. So if you want to come take a look. A lot of people chat back to me and say, Keith, that's creepy. Yeah, if you watch me record for like more than an hour, that is interesting. But if you want to get like a feel for what it looks like, that's the way to do it. Also, there's our CBT Nuggets handle for Twitter. You can also find me on Facebook and YouTube at Keith Barker Networking. I've got I think there's like 40,000 people that follow Keith Barker Networking on YouTube, and it's a lot of fun. And I have a fan page also at Facebook. And those resources, those are all free. Okay, so let's go ahead and let me grab the questions real quick. First question, which platform is better for VDI, Virtual Desktop Infrastructure? Is it VMware View or Citrix Zen Desktop? That is a fantastic question. And it reminds me of the question that people ask me all the time is, what should I study? You know, I'm going for a CCIE. Should I study route switch or security or service provider? Or I'm studying, networking. Should I study Juniper or Checkpoint, Juniper or HP or Cisco? Or if they're studying security, should I study Palo Alto or Checkpoint? Now, I happen to be certified in like almost all of I mentioned. I'm not a CCIE for a service provider, but I've got a CCIE in route switch and security. I've got my certifications from Palo Alto, also from Checkpoint and Juniper and HP. So here's my position. I think that if I had to choose which one I would use, whether it's Citrix or VMware, I would first of all look at the features I want in my infrastructure, because there's lots of bells and whistles that we may or may not need. So I look at the features I would want. Let me back up further. If we don't have vSphere and we don't have any of the Citrix backend yet, that would also be a consideration as well. If we have like a blank slate, so I would consider the features that are involved. I would consider the price for the purchase of the licenses of what I'm going to implement. I would set up test beds for both based on how you plan to use it. Because somebody says, oh, this says this is, for example, PC over IP versus the HDX or the ICA protocol used for Citrix. This one's always better than this one. I would lab it up and verify it. You know, if you're not using high-res graphics, maybe don't test for high-res graphics. Or if you're using XYZ or ABC, I would simulate in both lab environments the network that you plan to roll out, and then I would look at the cost. I would look at the ease of management. For example, how much effort is it to roll out new desktops and maintain them and patch them, in Horizon View versus in Zen Desktop and Zen Up. And again, you can integrate with Horizon View to Zen Desktop. And I know I've been circling on this because I'm not going to say either one's better. I'm going to say it depends on your budget and the features you want and what the results are in your lab environment. So because we do training on both products, I wouldn't say that one is always better than the other. Now, when it comes to firewalls, you can ping me personally on my Facebook, and I'll tell you which one. I'll tell you why some of the major firewalls are not quite as good as some of the other competitors. But that's another story. Okay, I think I've answered that. I danced around that one, Anthony, and I'm going to mark that one as answered. Thank you for the question. Okay, another question from another question in the queue. What kind of bandwidth do you recommend? And it really depends on what you're going to be putting over that pipe. For a user, so we have Bob out here, and let me get my pen. So here's Bob, the user, and he's sitting at his computer. He's running Horizon View client. And if he's connected to a virtual machine, if we're using remote printing, which could be happening, if he has USB support, if we have a hybrid, like a NVIDIA graphics card, sometimes on an ESXi host, we can actually have a lot of that processing done. But if that's being all sent to him, if he's having multimedia sent to him for processing, it really will depend. I have seen environments where we had like 20 users over a T1, but I'll tell you what, that is a bad baseline because that configuration has to scrimp and tweak and tune for the bare necessities, including lossless options and how flash is going to play and all other types of tweaks. So the bigger the pipe, the better you'll be. But in a situation where you're in a high-speed local area network, the bandwidth is usually not a problem. If you're going to be remote, you would definitely, absolutely, every time want to lab that up, put on traffic shaping with whatever network tools you're using to limit the bandwidth, and then see what the results really are for actual use. Because at the end of the day, if it isn't acceptable to the user, if it doesn't work for your business, it won't be an acceptable application. And it has to be if you're going to use it successfully. So I would say lab it up, verify with the protocols and the applications that you will be using to see exactly what's acceptable to the users, and always have a little bit to spare. So if you found out that you need 1 megabit per second, I would make sure that your bandwidth isn't capped at 1 megabit per second. Get yourself a little from there as well. So great question. All right, I've got 1 minute left, and I've got several questions in the queue. Okay. All right. I'm sorry I can't get to all these. Let me just pick one last one. This is a comment saying, I know she didn't mention View Transfer Server, or has that been removed from the VDI infrastructure? And Transfer Server is no longer part of Horizon View 6. So that was in Horizon View 5, and that has been removed. So that's why I didn't mention it here in my topology. And then there's a couple other questions regarding scaling. And if you didn't get your question answered here, if you want to hit me on my Facebook page, just search for Keith Parker Networking. And there's a few thousand people there who joined. And just go ahead and post your question there. I'd be more than happy to respond there if you'd like. And Anthony, I do appreciate you kicking this off. I took all the time. I appreciate you, letting me share the time with a lot of our learners and individuals out there who are interested in Horizon View. And for everybody who's joined us today, we mostly thank you for your time, because that's the most critical resource that any of us have. So Anthony, I'm going to turn it back over to you, my friend.
All right. Thank you so much. Hey, thank you everybody for attending, and thank you, Keith. That was awesome. I just want to remind you guys once again that if you missed any of the webinar, don't worry, we've got you covered. Just visit blog.cbtnuggets.com, and we're going to be posting the recording there later this week. But thank you all for spending your time with us, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your week.